High-quality spray-dried bovine plasma is one of the most widely used protein sources put into a milk replacer in the U.S. I've been involved with this product at Animix, selling and servicing and technically supporting it and even doing research on it for 20 years at Animix, dealing with the milk replacer industry. And 4 or 5 years prior to that, at APC as well. My roots are swine before I became a dairy person and then a calf person, and I saw plasma get launched in that industry. It was a total game changer. Weaning pigs and putting them into nurseries and commingling them was an incredibly stressful thing for a young pig to go through. And it was one of the adjuncts that probably had the most profound impact of anything that we've put into baby pig feeds. This happened in the 80s and 90s. I saw it firsthand. And again, it was a total game changer. And then I got involved with it with the calf in the early 2000s and have seen it made that same kind of transformation in the calf industry since then. This is what it looks like, even though it's a blood-based product. You can see it's just straw colored. It won't change anything about. You won't even notice it in the milk replacer. Typical use rate is going to be about 5%. It'll replace typically 15 to 25% of the protein in the formula. Has a very similar amino acid profile and similar digestibility to milk protein. So it's on par with milk protein from a nutritional perspective, but the key benefit and reason to use it is that it improves calf health and growth. So if we judge spray-dried plasma, there are 49 reputable studies, of which 22 are published and 27 are non-published but mostly presented at dairy science meetings. So it's excellent research. I won't, for sake of time, be able to go through the details of those, but if I really draw the bottom line, is that it typically reduces scours in not in a super profound way, but more typically in a 10, 20, 30% reduction when you've got a controlled study. The big difference is that it improves livability. And when you've got any of those kind of uncontrolled events where you're going with mortality in the teens or 20s, it typically cuts it in half. And that's one of the key reasons growers really like it. Calves stay on milk better, of course. If they're getting these kind of improvements, they'll use less meds. They're just less hassles in rearing calves. Now, right now, it costs a little bit more than $1.50 a bag in some instances to put plasma in at 5%. More typically, though, it will be either cost neutral or it'll cost $1 a bag or it'll save $1 a bag, depending upon its comparison cost to WPC and skim milk. I think one of the biggest reasons to use it is just not only the controlled research and the economics being fairly similar to milk protein and the digestibility being similar to milk protein, but the fact that it's so proven out in the field. Hordes does surveys. The last one I saw reported that about half of the milk solids consumed by the dairy calves in the U.S. is composed of milk replacer and the other half is whole milk. Well, if I look at the number of truckloads of plasma we sell to the milk replacer industry annually and then assume 60 pounds of solids per calf, just sort of a tire-kicking median number, and assume a 5% a typical inclusion rate of plasma in milk replacer, I come up with about a 40% market share. There's also a lot of plasma-based packs like GAM that you can get at Calf Care that where plasma is touching even more calves than that for those maybe that are on an all milk. Those that aren't aware of this data haven't really thought it through. And so they'll add GAM, or you might feed plasma in the milk replacer and add some extra GAM for the first week or two of life, just to make sure that the calf's getting its maximal protection from that type of technology. But that's a massive market share. It's got nearly, I would say, almost 100% market share in the veal industry. And a lot of that's out west, but it's even growing in use by leaps and bounds in the Midwest and the Northeast, where growers are beginning to understand it. This is a really busy slide, but I think an incredibly important one. So I do want to take you through it. So please bear with me on it. Of those 49 studies, if there was the plasma group or the control group or both, or either or both, that were 5% mortality or more, that study found its way into this slide. So this would be the more stressed studies out of those 49. And they're always comparing an all milk to one that contained plasma. And so the first one, the top one, is that E. coli challenge study, the aforementioned one, where all the calves died if they were on an all milk. but only 22% of them died if they were on plasma. The second line item there is an example of a study where it was beyond the scope of what plasma can touch. And I think it's important to point that out. This is not a panacea. These calves, Jim Quigley did this study when he was with APC, author of Calf Notes, in Iowa, and those calves were long transport from Wisconsin. They came in with Pasteurella and Salmonella, and then they were induced with coronavirus. So really nasty cocktail of disease challenges. Half the calves died, and it didn't matter if plasma was in there or not. Now, the plasma calves did have less morbidity, less treatments, but it did take a medication, Neoterra, to take a big bite down to where you had just 25% mortality. But then that bracket, the second bracket there, I call that plasma's sweet spot. If you've got a nasty group of calves, lots of FPT, failure passive transfer, poor colostrum status, commingled, transported, super stressed calves, and when you've got that spike of mortality that's going on in the teens or 20s percentages, if you had a control group there and you had plasma in there, we'd be demonstrating these kind of reductions. Look at these, 27 down to 24. The next one was 25. And if you had plasma, it was down to 6.3. And anything in red was statistical significant reduction. The next one was 24.5 versus 11.5. And that one was significant. 22 versus roughly 13. The next one was 20% mortality, cut down to 4 if you had plasma in there. 17 down to 12. 16.7 down to 0. The next one was statistically significant at roughly 16 down to almost 2. Dramatic statistically significant reduction. Next one, 13 down to roughly 5, and 12 down to 7. Again, that's plasma's sweet spot. Makes a profound difference in reducing mortality. Statisticians would go nuts if they saw me just tally those numbers up like I did at the bottom there, but I do think it gives a bird's eye view. Is 18 down to 10, and this is what we commonly hear. If you're humming along at 5 in your system on a dairy, if you go on a plasma-containing milk replacer, it's not uncommon to see it down to 2 or 3. And again, this is 2,341 studies or calves across a plethora of studies. Why does this work? Well, I think these disease challenge studies, and I know of nothing else we put in a milk replacer with this many disease challenge studies, particularly a crypto one. The top one, that crypto one, I think is particularly interesting. This research was conducted at NC State, published in Pediatric Research. The researchers were looking for adjuncts to provide infants in developing world countries that were presented emaciated with diarrhea and all kinds of problems. And they saw that this really worked in a calf if they fed them spray-dried serum, bovine serum, which is just plasma minus a tiny bit of fibrinogen that's in there. They captured all the fecal material, literally captured it. And they found that adding the bovine serum reduced diarrhea by a third. They had an intricate gut repair measurement system and an improved gut repair by roughly a third. The aforementioned E. coli disease challenge study saw the reduced mortality from 100 to 22. The one study done in Canada with a low inclusion rate of bovine plasma saw improved average daily gain when it was added. And finally, an Iowa State University study where calves were induced with coronavirus and fed a high level of bovine serum noted improved feed intake and hydration. So 4 disease challenge published studies. One non-published one saw no effect. Lastly, I want to bring up about transition milk. This has been kind of a hot topic at the university level and even out in industry. It's what everybody's talking about. I love transition milk. If you could harvest it, feed it clean, not allow it to get out of condition, make sure it was fed properly, I'd do it. But most people, hardly anyone, can really do that day in, day out. And all you have to do is have one day of poorly managing it, and you've got a bacterial broth that's spreading disease around. Well, you can recreate transition milk because plasma is like 22 or 3% by weight. IgG, it contains growth factors proven in that crypto disease challenge study to repair gut lining. Many of the functional proteins that are in colostrum are in plasma, and that makes sense because in a cow's mammary gland before she gives birth, where does she get the goodies to make colostrum? A lot of blood, of course. And so we decided before this was ever cool, we did a study of this, comparing an oil milk to either one with added plasma daily, like we had the grower go around and put it in the bowls, and we made these all isonutritious. We compared some protein and we added some fat with the plasma to make it isonutritious with the colostrum, And same with the WPC protein, the milk protein. We added some fat to it to make it the same protein and fat level as the colostrum. And you can see that during the peak scour week in that veal barn, and every veal barn, when they fill the room, has some week where there's typically way more scours than another. And during that 7-day period, we had half as much scours and almost to the same magnitude. No statistical difference if you had either plasma or colostrum in there. So it did exactly what we'd expect. And that also corresponded with half as much mortality, even though that wasn't statistically significant. Shows you the kind of barn we were working in below in the picture. It's the same site for both studies. The second one, we saw improved gain. So what plasma does is it helps improve livability, reduce morbidity, it's cost effective, and it's biologically normal because it contains a high level of IgGs and functional proteins.